And so when they see you obsessively on your device, when they see you watching football as opposed to being with the family, when they see you ignoring them and engrossed in something else and distracted as opposed to doing something you said you were going to do, whether it's, I said I was going to work out and I'm not, I said I was going to eat healthy and I'm not, I said I was going to be with you and I'm not, whatever the case might be, they see that example. So the best thing you can do to raise indistractable kids is to learn how to become indistractable yourself and to be honest with them and say, look, I'm struggling with this too. Let's go on this journey together.
This show is dedicated to helping you strengthen your family tree and live financially free. Welcome to the Marriage, Kids, and Money podcast, everybody. This is Andy Hill, and today we're talking about how we can become indistractable. Technology has done a lot of wonderful things for us over the last decade. Tasks that were once extremely time-consuming or monotonous are now a lot simpler. On the flip side, though, we can become extremely distracted by technology, and it can keep us from focusing on what matters most. And for me, personally, that's family. So what do we do? How can we enjoy the benefits of technology without getting constantly distracted by it? Well, our guest today, Nir Eyal, is on a mission to help us all take control of our lives. Nir is the author behind the new book, Indistractable: How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. He has taught at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and his writing on technology, psychology, and business appears in the Harvard Business Review, The Atlantic, TechCrunch, and Psychology Today. When Nir isn't helping people become indistractable, he enjoys spending time with his wife, Julie, and their daughter. Welcome to the show, Nir.
Thanks so much for having me, Andy. Great to be here.
It's great to have you. Well, let's talk about tech. So take us back. You've talked about this a lot. I had a chance to enjoy your book. When did technology start to become such a distraction for us?
Yeah, so I'll start with my personal story of like why I wrote this book and why this was such an important issue for me. So for me, the really seminal moment when I decided I had to reassess my relationship with distraction was a few years ago. I was sitting with my daughter and we had this beautiful afternoon plan, just some quality daddy-daughter time. And I remember we had this book of different activities that we could play together, right? To, make a paper airplane contest, make an origami crane, all kinds of different activities that we could do together. And one of the activities in the book was to ask each other this question: if you could have any superpower, what superpower would you want? And I remember that question verbatim, but I can't tell you what my daughter said, because in that moment, for whatever reason, I don't even remember, I started looking at my phone. And before I realized what I was doing, when I looked up from my device, I saw that my daughter had left the room, because I was sending her a very clear message that whatever was on my phone was more important than she was. And she went to go play with some toy outside. And I'd blown it. And if I'm honest with you, Andy, it didn't just happen with her. It would happen when I would sit down at work and I would say, oh, I'm going to work on this big project. And yet 20, 30, 45 minutes later, I was doing everything but the thing I said I was going to do. It would happen with my physical health when I said, okay, I'm definitely going to exercise today. I'm definitely going to eat right. But I didn't, and I wouldn't. And so if you ask me today what superpower I would want, it's the power to be indistractable, that this will be the skill of the century, that there is no facet of your life that is not impacted by your ability to control your attention. And we have got to teach this skill to our kids, because if you think the world is distracting now, just wait a few years with virtual reality and augmented reality and who knows what other realities. It's going to be incredibly important. The people who are going to really differentiate themselves in the future have to be the ones who can sustain their attention. There will be a real bifurcation between people who allow their time and attention to be manipulated by others, and those who stand up and say, no, I decide how I will control my attention. I will choose my life. I will become indistractable. So that's my own story. And then that kind of launched me on this 5-year research journey to understand the deeper psychology of distraction. But to your question of when did we all become distracted by technology, the answer is at least 2,500 years ago. Now, why do I say that? That's not the answer you were expecting. You were expecting, oh, since Facebook, since the iPhone, since the internet. Nope. In fact, the Greek philosopher Plato talked about this very same problem. In the Greek, it's called akrasia, the tendency to do things against our better interest. So at least 2,500 years ago, that's the oldest recorded record we have of someone complaining about how distracting the world is. So what does that tell us? Well, it tells us it's not actually the technology, right? If Plato was complaining about this 2,500 years before the internet, it can't be technology's fault, which is, of course, everyone's knee-jerk reaction. We all want it to be technology's fault, but I'm here to tell you that is a scapegoat. that what I discovered, and I wanted it to be true too, by the way. I wanted to just, oh, it's all tech's fault. Let me just put stop using technology. But I realized two things. Number one, I can't. My job depends upon it, right? Like I can't stand these chicken little tech critics that say, "Oh, well, just stop using Facebook or stop using the email, stop using your phone." Well, thanks, stupid. I'll get fired, right? My job depends upon that. And why should we? Frankly, these technologies are fantastic. They can do so much for us. But the more important thing I realized is even when I did that, I said, "Okay, I'll follow these people's advice. I read these books on how we should get rid of our tech, and I did that." Right? I got myself a flip phone from the 1990s with no internet connection. I got a word processor so that I could do nothing but write, no internet at all. And guess what? I still got distracted. You know why? Because I would start writing and then I would realize, oh, you know what? My desk is a mess here. Let me just clean up my desk real quick. Or let me take out the trash. Or, oh, you know what? Now is a great time to do laundry. And I realized that I kept getting distracted, even if it wasn't the technology that was distracting me. Because here's the bigger truth. Distraction begins from within. It's not about the stuff outside of us. It's about what's happening inside of us. And if we don't understand the deeper psychology of distraction, let me tell you, we will always find a way to distract ourselves.
Yeah, you make a good point in the book about, I guess, scheduling your time so that distraction doesn't take over. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I think it's important first to describe what is distraction. It's one of those words that you think, I thought I understood what that word meant, but the deeper I went into it, I realized, wait, I had a complete misconception about what that word is. So the best way to understand what distraction is to understand what distraction is not. So if you ask most people what's the opposite of distraction, they'll tell you it's focus, right? Not exactly. If you look at the origin of the word, the opposite of distraction is not focus. The opposite of distraction is traction. Traction and distraction. So both words come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull. And you'll notice they both end in the same 6 letters, A-C-T-I-O-N, that spells action, reminding us that distraction is not something that happens to us, but rather it is an action that we ourselves actively take. So traction, by definition, is any action that pulls you towards what you said you were going to do, things that you do with intent, things that move you closer to your values and help you become the kind of person you want to become. The opposite of traction is distraction, any action that pulls you further away from what you said you were going to do, further away from your values, further away from doing what you said you were going to do. So this is a really important distinction because I would argue you can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from, right? Let me say that again. You can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. So to answer your question, Andy, if someone lives their life like I used to live my life, being a to-do list devotee, but with a blank calendar, you are begging for distraction. Why? Because if your calendar doesn't tell you what is traction in your day, what is distraction? Right? If you have lots of white space in your day, I have so much time, I'll get all these things done, and then those tend to be your least productive days, or the ones that you don't schedule your time. So this is no longer optional. Okay, if you find that you're not doing what you said you were going to do. I was so glad to be on your show because this is exactly the kind of topics that people tend to get distracted from. Their marriage, they get distracted from their kids, they get distracted from their money. Like these are all things that require forethought. They require us to plan ahead. If you want a good marriage, you can't have a good marriage over let's take a vacation over the weekend. No, a good marriage is built over days, weeks, months, years, right? If you want a great relationship with your kids, you have to invest that time with forethought to be fully present with them. If you want to make money, you can't just, make money in a weekend. You have to deliberately plan ahead how you're going to achieve your financial goals. All these things require us to plan ahead. And so if you don't plan your time, right, which is absolutely fundamental to having a good relationship with your spouse, a good relationship with your kids, and making money, you've got to plan your time. That's the input for the output of those things we want. You have to plan that time in advance because you can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. So that's one of the most important tenets to becoming indistractable is making time for traction based on your values, which, by the way, I'm not saying can't include Facebook, video games, Twitter, whatever it is you want to do with your time. Frankly, I don't care. What I want you to do is to decide in advance how you want to spend your time according to your values and your schedule, not someone else's.
Absolutely. And it sounds like even with making the time, you have to first define what those values are. You can say, hey, I'm a family guy, or I want to do well with my money, but we need to first define what that actually means in order for you to make progress or in order for you to make traction. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, we have to start with our values. So, what are values? Another one of those words that I thought I understood the meaning of, but I really didn't. Values, as I define them, are attributes of the person you want to become. Attributes of the person you want to become. So, we have to ask ourselves, how would the person I want to become spend their time, right? We have to define that in advance. And by the way, it's no coincidence that we use the same language, the same terminology to describe money as we do with time. Think about it, right? We make money just like we make time. We spend money just like we spend time. We pay attention just like we pay with dollars and cents. And it's amazing to me how greedy people are with their money, how cheap we are with our money, right? We clip coupons, we split checks when we go to lunch with our friends, we scrimp and save every penny. But when it comes to our time, take it. Whoever wants it, go ahead. Right? Which is ridiculous because you can always make more money. You can always make more money. You cannot make more time. I don't care if you're Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates. You can be, you have infinite amount of money. You get the same 24 hours in a day. So it should be the opposite. We should be stingy with our time and generous with our money because you cannot make more time. So it's absolutely critical that we sit down in advance and we ask ourselves, wait, how would the person I want to become spend their time to live according to our values?
I love that. So we've defined our values. Maybe we're carving out our time now and looking at that. Yet there are still distractions, pings and dings that come and hit us. How do we hack back some of these distractions, these things that pop up so that we can make some traction?
Yeah. So now that we have traction and distraction, the next question, as you're asking, is what prompts us towards these actions? And you've hit on it. They're called triggers, and there are two types of triggers. What most people blame for distraction are what we call the external triggers: the pings, the dings, the rings, all these things in our outside environment that can lead us towards distraction. And of course, there's lots of things we can do to hack back those external triggers. But it turns out studies find that that's only 10% of the cause of distraction are the external triggers, even though it's what we tend to blame, right? Oh, I was going to be with my kids, but then my phone buzzed and I picked it up, whatever the case might be. That's only 10% of the time that we get distracted. So what's the other 90%? Studies find that 90% of the time that we get distracted, it's not because of an external trigger, but rather it's because of what we call an internal trigger. What are internal triggers? Internal triggers are uncomfortable emotional states that we seek to escape. Okay. Boredom, loneliness, fatigue, uncertainty, stress, anxiety. This is the cause of 90% of our distractions. So the first step to becoming indistractable, even before we plan out our values and our schedule, before we hack back the external triggers, before any of that, step number one has to be to understand what is the emotional discomfort that we are escaping when we get distracted. Because let me tell you, whether it's too much news, too much booze, too much football, too much Facebook, you will always get distracted by one thing or another unless you stop and understand what is that emotion, that internal trigger that is driving you to escape that discomfort, and what can you do in advance? What will you plan to do when you feel that emotional itch? And this is the step that most people are not willing or unable to take. Right? We moralize and medicalize these type of behaviors. And it's not. For the vast majority of people, there's nothing wrong with you. Only 3% of the population has ADHD. There's a 97% chance that is not you if you're listening to this. It's not that you have any kind of medical diagnosis. It's not that these distractions are necessarily moral failings or that there's something wrong, that you've done something wrong. No, it's just that the vast majority of people don't have the skill set to recognize when they feel this emotional discomfort and then have a tool to deal with that emotional discomfort in a healthy way that leads them towards traction rather than distraction. So this was the big aha moment for me in my life, is when I realized, wait a minute, I'm not using these tools because of the tool. I'm using them as escape. I'm using them to get my head into a different place. And that's the deeper truth here that we have to not only understand for ourselves, but to model for our children. Because this is truly how we raise indistractable kids. We teach them that what we have to do as we grow up, as we mature, is to understand how to master those internal triggers, or they will become our master.
I'm glad you brought up parenting. Let's dive into that. I have a daughter, and she's 9 years old. Screen time ends up being a conversation that we have a lot. She really likes it. And obviously, I've chosen a career that requires me to be on devices quite a bit. I'm a content creator. I try to use my phone for as much as I can so that I have less things to deal with. Now, we're talking about screen time a lot. I have conversations with her about the right amount of time. How can somebody like me start this conversation with my daughter and have a happy medium where she finds the right amount of time? And as a parent, I feel like I'm not letting her life waste away on Roblox.
Yeah, I hear you. So there's a few things we can do. Number one, let's understand what the research really shows. The research shows that 3 hours or less of extracurricular screen time, not one study has shown any deleterious effects. So one thing we can do is to lower the temperature. I think the media has promoted this mindset that technology is evil, that it's hijacking your kids' brains, that it's turning them all into addicts. That's just silly. And it's no different from what we saw when I was a kid about television and heavy metal music and the congressional hearings around comic books. Like every new technology, parents want to blame the technology and say, you see, that's why my kid is acting the way they are. It can't be because of anything I'm doing. It must be the comic books. It must be the radio. It must be the fill in the blank. Today it's social media and whatever. So let's lower the temperature and realize that, look, technology can be wonderful. And the last thing you want to do is to fill your kid's brain with fear around technology. Because if you tell them, these unscientific notions that it's melting their brain and they're all going to get addicted to it and it's bad for you. Well, one, they see that's not true, right? So they can see right through that. And two, scaring them about technology doesn't serve their interest because, look, the jobs of the future require them to be comfortable with technology. So there's a lot of good that can come from technology when it's used correctly, right? It's almost like teaching a kid how to swim. Swimming is wonderful. Swimming swimming pools also kill children who drown in them. So you don't want to, teach a kid how to swim by tossing them in the pool and hoping they float. You want to make sure they're ready to learn how to swim and then, appropriately show them the way. And so there's something very similar we have to do with technology, starting with, setting boundaries. So this is very similar to what we do for ourselves around becoming indistractable, is we make time to use the technology. So what many people do is they're constantly fighting with their kids, being the police officers, dictating when they can and can't use the technology, as opposed to dictating, discussing, right? Sitting down with your kid. This is what I did with my daughter when she was 6 years old. We sat down together and we said, look, the price of using this technology, it's not money. The price of using the technology is the time away from other things. Okay, it's time with your friends. It's time with your parents. It's time drawing. It's time reading. It's time doing all the other things you like to do in your day. That's the price of screen time. So let's sit down and ask ourselves, how do you want to spend your time? And by the way, this is exactly what we were just talking about in terms of turning your values into time that we talked about earlier for ourselves. And we asked her, how much screen time do you want? Right? We gave her the option. And I was expecting she'd say all day, but that's not what she said. You know what she said? She said 2 episodes, meaning 2 episodes of a show she liked on Netflix. Well, that's about 45 minutes. Fine. I'm okay with that. But she made the rule. She said how much she wanted. And I said, okay, that's fine. How will you make sure that you don't go over 45 minutes? I asked her. And she thought for a minute and she realized this was, my daughter's 13 now. So this was many years ago. And she realized that we used to have a microwave that was at counter level. So she could go to the microwave and use the timer to set a timer for 45 minutes. And when the timer beeped, she knew her time was up. How amazing is that, right? Because now I've taught her self-regulation and I don't have to be the bad guy anymore, right? She monitors herself, which is a lifelong skill that she has to develop. So now, by the way, she doesn't use a microwave. Now the technology has progressed so much so that she can use, Apple's screen time features. It comes built right into the phone. She can monitor herself. So that's a big thing, is to set those boundaries, including some what I think should be hard and fast rules around no phone zones. For example, the dinner table. We know that families that eat together stay together. The studies are pretty conclusive that you really do not want to have phones at the table. Well, that's a rule that you can set that you have to abide by as well, by the way. So, setting those boundaries is very important. But also using the 4 steps of the Indistractable model to teach them how to become indistractable by realizing their external triggers. That's going to be very, very important. And there's a whole section in the book on how to raise indistractable kids. And we don't have time to go through all of it, but I will tell you, parents really do need to understand this concept of what we call psychological nutrients, that children today are really deficient in these 3 psychological nutrients. And they look for these psychological nutrients online when they can't get them offline. And this is called the needs displacement hypothesis. So it's absolutely critical that parents understand what kids are looking for in the first place when they go online and use technology excessively. That's very, very important. And then the last thing I would say, and perhaps the most important, is that we as parents, if we want to raise indistractable kids, we have to be indistractable ourselves. I can't tell you how many parents tell me about, oh, my kid's on Minecraft and he won't stop with the social media and she won't get off TikTok. And meanwhile, as they're telling me this, they're checking email on their phone. Kids come pre-installed with hypocrisy detection devices. You may not see their little invisible antenna, but I'm telling you, they are constantly scanning for when you screw up. And they're looking at you as an example. You're the most important template of what it means to be an adult in their world. And so when they see you obsessively on your device, when they see you watching football as opposed to being with the family, when they see you ignoring them and engrossed in something else and distracted as opposed to doing something you said you were going to do, whether it's, I said I was going to work out and I'm not, I said I was going to eat healthy and I'm not, I said I was going to be with you and I'm not, whatever the case might be, they see that example. So the best thing you can do to raise indistractable kids is to learn how to become indistractable yourself and to be honest with them and say, look, I'm struggling with this too. Let's go on this journey together.
Yeah, I think that's good to be the example. Not only we talk about financially on this show, but also with your relationship with your wife, with your habits as a person, you are managing these devices. Well, Nir, somebody's listening right now and they're ready to become indistractable. What is one piece of advice we could leave with them that they could do today?
Sure. So I'll give you the mantra that I repeat every day to myself, which is something that I adopted after doing the research and writing this book, which is this: the antidote to impulsiveness is forethought. Let me say that again. The antidote to impulsiveness is forethought. That these problems that we, if we don't have the kind of marriage we want, if we don't have the relationship with our kids we want, if we don't have the kind of financial freedom we want, this is a problem of impulse control. It's not a moral failing. There's nothing wrong with you. It's simply that we haven't learned the ways to control our impulses. Well, the antidote to all of these impulse control issues is forethought, planning ahead, right? There is no distraction that you can't overcome if you plan ahead. But if you wait to the last minute, right? If the chocolate cake is on the fork and you're on a diet, you're going to eat it. If the cigarette is in your hand and you're trying to quit, you're going to smoke it. If you sleep next to your cell phone, it's going to be the first thing you reach for in the morning because it's too late. They're going to get you. You have to plan in advance. And so that's why I say the antidote to impulsiveness is forethought, that anyone can become indistractable by taking these steps in advance to make sure that we stay in traction rather than allowing ourselves to get into distraction.
Absolutely. Well, I hope everybody will enjoy this because we're going to make some traction today. Let's talk about where people can find this book and then maybe follow you if they want to learn more from you.
I appreciate it. Thanks. So my blog is nirandfar.com. That's spelled N-I-R, like my first name, nirandfar.com. And if you go to indistractable.com, there's actually an 80-page workbook that's complimentary. We actually couldn't fit it into the final edition of the book. It was too long, but it's available. Anyone can get it for free at Indistractable. That's spelled I-N, the word distract, A-B-L-E. So indistractable.com, and that's where you can download that free workbook.
Excellent. Nir, thank you so much. Everybody, I'm an audio guy. I like to learn through audio. Loved the audio book. I listened to it while I was doing yard work outside, going for walks. It definitely gave me a lot to think about in all of these facets of my life, in my work, in my relationship with my kids, and with my wife. So if you are looking to improve yourself in all of these areas, like we try to do a lot on this show, please check out this book. Check out nirandfar.com. Nir, thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure, Andy. Thank you.